Welcome back to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in Waynesville, North Carolina. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. And today I want to revisit the chart of Bitcoin, the original cryptocurrency that is really, it's changing the world. It's a revolutionary technology. And I watched a video, my buddy that was out in Wyoming for the Cardano. Cardano is the third largest cryptocurrency by market cap right now. And my buddy was out there at the recent Cardano conference, and he sent me the video of the opening ceremony by the founder, Chuck. I like Chuck. Chuck seems like a good guy. It always reminds me of Charlie Brown, and he's kind of like Charlie Brown because he's sort of ho-hum. Even when he's excited, it's sort of even. It's kind of a nice quality. It's sort of humble and grounded, actually. But anyway, he was talking about how that it's the nature of the technology is revolutionary, and it revolutionizes whatever it touches, right? And I was like, that's it, man. And he was talking about how it's designed where you don't need a king or a president or some kind of tyrant, lording over. Like it's totally decentralized. And I was like, oh my God, so if you Google that and you watch that video, you can hear him talking about many of the things that I was talking about in the previous video that I did about the Bitcoin chart, where I was talking about how it is, because it's a nocturnal birth, it is countercultural in the sense that daytime, yang, masculine, patriarchal, whatever you want to call it, that is kind of the modus operandi of Western civilization as we know it. And so if you have a nocturnal chart, because it's feminine, yin, it is counter to that mainstream. And what's more feminine than decentralized? Everybody's equal, right? So we talked about that last time, and somebody brought up a really good question about that. And so I want to start off addressing that question. I'm just going to share my screen here. So let's go back to the Bitcoin chart here. So you can see, because the sun is below the horizon line, this red line across here from this says AS, that's ascendant. That's the rising degree, right? And the lunar nodes happen to be right on the ascendant descendant. And the sun is well below. So the sun has set, it's January, right? In the UK. The sun set probably about 5 p.m., I would guess. So it's a full hour past sunset. It's dark, right? It's dark, it's nighttime. So this is a nocturnal chart. And we talked about last time how that sets it up as countercultural. And it sets up the team of the moon, Venus, Mars, and Mercury, because Mercury is evening star. Mercury has just set. Mercury set well after the sunset in this chart, and we're going to talk about Mercury a lot more in this video. But one thing I wanted to point out, somebody said, well, hey, if you said that Leo is the sign of centralized authority, and it is. It's the king. It's the, if it's a good king, it's a philosopher king. We haven't had many of those. If it's a bad king, it's a tyrant or worse, but it's that central singular figure that upon which everything comes back to, right? That's been the defining way that humans have organized themselves for millennia. And this chart has that sign rising. However, notice that the south node of the moon is there. The south node in Vedic astrology, in Indian, that is Hindu astrology, is known as K2. K2 is the renunciate. K2 says, I want nothing to do with the worldliness, the materiality, the sensuality, all of that Maya, all of that karmic entanglement. I want to put that at arm's length, right? And in fact, now this is my limited understanding of a very exotic culture to me. I'm very Western, so if I get this wrong, forgive me. But I've even read that, this is embodied by older men will literally hand over the business and the house and everything to the younger son and go out and live in the woods, right? They literally walk away from everything. And so this is the path of the renunciate or the ascetic or what. Okay, so you see, this chart is saying, yes, the sign of the central authority is rising, but it's renouncing that very clearly. It's in the blockchain, it's in the Genesis block, denouncing the printing of fiat currency, once again, the banks are in trouble. Oh, they're too big to fail. Print a bunch of money, give them a bunch of free money, and everything will be all right. Keep kicking the can down the road. Well, Bitcoin is set up to be exactly the opposite of that. There's only this many Bitcoin. There will never be any more, and so it's set up to be counter to that. All right. So hopefully that answers the question that, even though it has the sign of central authority rising, it is renouncing that role. See, so that is in tune with the fact that it's a nocturnal chart. Another thing to notice that we closed talking about how Saturn opposite Uranus was the revolutionary signature, and we talked about how the founder of Cardano was talking about how blockchain technology is revolutionary by its nature, and that it has the effect of revolutionizing whatever it touches, right? So notice that Saturn and Uranus are opposite. So generally speaking, this would be seen as a tension between the Uranian would be the revolutionary technology, and the Saturn would be the establishment and the old, what they call now, they're calling it the dynasty financial system. Now, that being said, in this particular chart, the story is doubly revolutionary because Saturn is actually revolutionary also, because if you know about the fixed stars, this is the fixed star. If I just go up here and I'll add in this star. The star is called Denebola. Deneb, by the way, and anytime you're looking at stars, Deneb means tail. And in this case, Denebola is Beta Leo. It's the tail of the lion. So 2145, 2146. Saturn is not just the strictest rule for interpreting fixed stars is they need to be within a degree, 1 degree. Some people go outside of that for particular stars, especially if they're close to the ecliptic. In this case, we're not just within 1 degree, we're within 1 minute of arc, 1/60th of a degree. And if we look at that in a sky scenario, you can see here's Saturn, and if we draw a line through, here's the Beta Leo. Here is Alpha Leo. This is Regulus. Okay, Regulus is the king. Now, if we look at the constellation of Leo, if Alpha Leo is the king, Beta Leo is on the opposite side of the figure. So it is opposite to the king. Therefore, it is the opposition party or the counterculture or the anti-establishment star. You see, I did a whole thing on this back in, people really hated me for it, actually. But I wasn't saying that I wanted Trump to get elected. I was saying that I think he might. And people were like, oh, I mean, one guy got all mad at me and he said, Trump will never get elected and you can take that to the bank. And I was like, well, I don't know. I'm not so sure. I stopped short of predicting that Trump would be elected because I was afraid people would, try to cancel me or something, man. All I was saying is like, look, the stars are saying a different story. I'm not choosing sides here. I'm trying to be, um, you know, what do they call it when you're objective? Like maybe this guy could actually get elected. Um, because that star was activated by the eclipse, right? Right. So what you had was in 2017, you had the Regulus was being eclipsed. So the King star was being eclipsed, and Denebola was on the midheaven of the US. When you cast the chart for the capital of the US, Denebola, the anti-establishment, was on the midheaven. So the establishment king was being eclipsed, the anti. So here we have a story very clearly. The establishment king is being eclipsed. The anti-establishment is on the midheaven. They should have run Bernie Sanders and they would have won, because the anti-establishment was gonna win. So, anyways, and if that makes me a Bernie bro, so be it. Hopefully we're over all that crap. But anyway, I digress. This anti-establishment star is connected to Saturn. So even the supposedly grounded rules and structure, everything about this thing is anti-establishment. Even the Saturn is anti-establishment in this chart. So I just wanted to clear that up right away and if you haven't seen the other video, the first video that I did, really stop now, go back and watch that one, and then come back to this one because it's going to set everything up for you to really understand what we're gonna go into here, which is we're going to go deep into the astrology of Mercury in the Bitcoin chart. And it's unbelievable how strong Mercury shows up in this chart. We talked about last time how the moon is what we call the almutin of the figure in this chart. The moon rules over the degrees of the most of the important places. So the important places are the ascendant, the sun and the moon, the prenatal lunation, and the lot of fortune. The moon has the most rulerships in those degrees. So the moon becomes the most important planet. The moon becomes the place where the daimon, or the guardian angel of this chart, comes from. It comes from the moon. And notice what happened. And I told you, like, there's some people who forecast simply by the moon cycles, and they've noticed that from the full moon to the new moon is usually a growth cycle. And look what's happened since the last full moon. We went from like, I think it went up like 20% or something. It went from the 40s back up into the 50s, the highest it's been really since, early in the year when it reached the all-time high. And so you can clearly see these moon cycles. All right. And now here's the thing. Even though the moon is very important in this chart and sort of rules it in a way, Mercury, I think, is actually the most important planet in this chart because there's so many ways that it shows up as being important. And we're just going to talk about a few here. So if I usually use whole sign houses, but I'm going to bring in a different view for a second. Let's just use porphyry. But so that we have the ascendant descendant axis clearly demarcated here, okay? So notice that the midheaven is at 18 degrees of Aries, the ascendant is at 850, the descendant's at 850. So Mercury is the only planet in this chart that is conjunct one of the 4 angles of the chart. And these 4 angles are the places where this is literally where the earth meets the sky, right? So see here in the background that I have, where the earth meets the sky, that's the ascendant descendant. Mercury is conjunct that, a little bit below, Mercury's set maybe 15 minutes before this, 10 minutes, something like that. So Mercury is the only planet that is conjunct one of these four angles. And these four angles are very important. And these four angles form what I call the first thing I do when I start looking at charts. I look at them in a hermetic fashion, which is to say, I look at them on three separate levels. And I look at what I call the structural considerations, which has to do with the alchemical principle of salt. Salt, the tria prima of alchemy, we have salt, sulfur, and spirit. Okay, salt refers to the bodily aspect of something, the actual cellular matrix of the thing. So if we're talking about like spagyrics, right, and purifying an herb, a plant material, and you know, breaking it apart, putting it back together, we're talking about the actual mineral salts, of the plant, right? The structural components. So the structural components of the chart, the ascendant and descendant, is the main structural components. Okay. So one of the first things you look for is are there any planets on an angle? And if you have planets on an angle, that planet is going to be always very important in your transit analysis, because transits from that planet will affect the chart more than any other planet, because it is angular, because it is part of the cellular matrix of that entity. You see, it's part of the salt. You can't get around it. So right away we have that. There's another reason why Mercury is bound up in the salt of this chart. That is something that a lot of people would not know about. And that is that Mercury is conjunct its own node. So if I go in here and I click on Mercury's node, you'll see that there's a little glyph here below that shows up at 118. Mercury's at 248. This shows me that Mercury is conjunct its own node. Now, what does that mean exactly? What that means is that Mercury, planets are not always on the ecliptic. If you go back and you look at some of my other videos, I talk about this in depth, that this view that we're looking at right here, this horoscope view, is actually from the North Pole of the ecliptic. So it's from a God's eye view looking down on the ecliptic plane, which is the path of the Earth around the sun. It's from the North Pole of the ecliptic looking down. So it's flattened. We can't tell if there's anything above or below because there's no depth to it in that dimension. If we then flip the thing and look at it from the side, we can see very clearly what I'm talking about. So let's do that. And we'll look at it from the side view. So here is the ecliptic plane, this relatively flat line here. This is the ecliptic plane. That is the plane of the Earth's orbit around the sun. So it is the Earth plane, essentially. So what we have here is that the plane of Mercury is intersecting the plane of the Earth right here in the early degrees of Aquarius. So Mercury is injecting its energy into the orbit of the Earth right here. You see, so there is a structural component where the two structures, the structural matrix of the Earth, the structural matrix of Mercury, are coming together. So the salt of Mercury is mingling with the salt of the Earth. Okay. And you can see this so what I've done is I've put the track of Mercury here, and you can see shortly after the birth of Bitcoin, Mercury crossed the ecliptic going north here. It goes, it loops up and around, and then it crosses back again here. Okay, so you can see this crossing is just about to happen in a few days here. And that's really important. So, because in fact, you know, I started looking at this years ago, and I did. I predicted the crash of the legacy financial, the legacy stock market. I predicted the previous crash of that back in the last UAC was when was that? When was that? Geez, I can't even remember. Was it 2018? It must have been 2018. And I did a lecture called "The Predictive Aspects of Latitude Nodes and Retrograde Loops." And I said that the last time that Jupiter crossed the ecliptic going south, we had a crash in 2008. And the next time that Jupiter does that, we could see that again. So it was a forecast. Excuse me. It wasn't a prediction. I didn't say it will do it. I said it could. That's the difference between a forecast and but within one day, the day that Jupiter crossed the ecliptic was the day after the crash, okay, in 2020, or the beginning of the crash, right? So these nodes have proven to be impactful in financial astrology. I've demonstrated that before the fact, said that it could be, and it was, okay? So this is stuff that's been tested, you see? And here we have it, it's embedded in the chart of Bitcoin, that we have one of these node crossings, right? So this is, and now here's the thing. It's not just any node crossing. If we understand these node crossings as a group, we get even more information. So let me go and look at that. So this happens to be the place where Mercury achieves its highest latitude. Latitude is the distance of Mercury north and south of the ecliptic. This particular crossing leads to the highest latitude of Mercury. So this is not just any crossing, but it's a crossing where Mercury goes the highest. It goes up. So it's very volatile. It has the most north-south movement. You see? We can see that my buddy Chris DiCarlo, who got turned on to this research that I had done, he plugged the data into, I think it's, I'm not a techie, so forgive me, I need to take Excel, right? He plugged the Swiss ephemeris into Excel and created this graph. And you'll notice here, see this? The most northerly latitude in each sign. Notice that it has the least amount of north latitude in Leo, and it has the most amount of north latitude in Aquarius. You see? So Mercury has the highest north latitude in Aquarius, and what that looks like is this. So when Mercury does these crossings, it does it in a looping formation or a Z formation. Z formation. These are Mercury's heliocentric nodes, which are in Scorpio and Taurus. These are the places where Mercury will actually cross the face of the sun in what's called a transit of Mercury by the astronomers. Astrologers refer to transits in a very different way, but they mean transiting across the face of the sun. The last one happened, let's see, 2019, I think, in Scorpio. I made some talismans at that point, and I inscribed some of my books with at that point in time, because I had been talking about these things. I did, and then one day I was. So you can see here that Mercury's loop in Aquarius is the one where it goes the farthest north, right? Some of these other ones, it kind of goes sideways a little bit. And in fact, because it's not in the middle of Aquarius, it's actually in the beginning of, it's a little sideways, but it's still the farthest north that it gets for the time being. And so what happened was, I'm just going to stop for a second and pause for a second so I can find the graphic that goes with this. So yeah, so I had been doing all this research. I presented, I made a forecast, the forecast came true, et cetera, et cetera. And then one night I was looking for something that I had read, and I thought I read it in the Picatrix. And I had looked and looked and looked, and I could not find it. And I was like, all right, I'm going to read this thing front to back, man. I'm going to go through it front to back, and I'm going to find this dang passage because it was driving me crazy. So I'm going through the Picatrix line by line, and I'm speed reading, man, because, and I'm, and all of a sudden I go, I go, back up. I was just about to turn the page, back up, back up, back up, back up. Did they just talk about planetary nodes in the Picatrix? Why, yes, they did. Because you see, I had got turned on to planetary nodes. The very first astrology book I ever read was called Astrology for the Millions. It was by this cat, Grant Louis, who was like, dude, Grant Louis, some people say he predicted his own death. The story is he told people, he started telling people, yeah, I'll talk to you more about that if I'm still around. He kept saying stuff like that. He took out a life insurance policy, paid one premium, and croaked. That's the story. I don't know if it's true, but it's a pretty good story. And but anyway, Grant Louis is an amazing astrologer. And so he created the first cookbook, Astrology for the Millions. It's a great, great book. In the midst of this cookbook, right? Really basic stuff, but it's not basic. He every so often he sprinkles in, oh, by the way, here's this mundane astrology chart. He doesn't even say that. He just, by the way, notice that the USA was born at the time when the planet Uranus was crossing its north node. Oh, has nothing to do with anything, but just boom, there it is. Like, and it's like, oh, then he goes on a little bit further. Oh, by the way, notice that the Soviet Union, the USSR, whatever, the United Soviet Socialist Republic, was born at the time when Neptune was crossing its own node. Oh, yeah, a little bit later. Oh, by the way, notice that the Nazi Germany, the Third Reich, was born when Pluto was crossing its own node. And by this time, you're going, what the actual? Wow, right? By the way, if you simply add, you go to 1776 and you add 84, there's a really potent history lesson for you, right? Because 84 is the time between the next time Uranus will cross its node. So take a look at that. And then 2028 is coming not too far away. I digress. That's a whole nother thing that we could get into. The point being that I had been turned on to planetary nodes from day one. That was the very first astrology book after I got the Rosicrucian Ephemeris, by which I found that my dream was real, that Venus was aligned with the sun at the time I had the dream, and so forth. The very next astrology book I got was Astrology for the Millions. So I had been into, and all of a sudden I'm reading the Picatrix. Wow, what? Look at this. So here we go. Here we go, right here in the Picatrix. They're just going along. And it's funny because, the Picatrix is a collection of things from all these books. This guy, what he did is he collected this whole library on all the important astrological works of the time. And then he cherry picked all the best stuff and put it in a book. Which, and he says, by the way, check out what he says here. Now, the whole foundation of these operations is in observing the motions of the planets and constellations. So notice observing. Thus, the ancient Greek sages were accustomed to observe a planet watching until it was in its proper Guzahar. And then we have a footnote down here that says Guzahar is a transliteration of the Arabic astrological term Jawzahir. A friend of mine that's on the Sufi path told me that Zahir means essentially like the unmanifest. So basically what it's saying is that when a planet is going from below the ecliptic to above, it's going from below, from the unmanifest into the manifest, right? The salt, it's crossing the earth plane and it's becoming more manifest, right? They placed it in the degree of the midheaven and burned an incense appropriate to the planet and made sacrifice with prayers likewise corresponding to the planet and asked that whatever they willed, they would obtain. They also did this similarly with the planet rising. So it's saying right here, this is a potent time for doing the magic of this planet, right? So essentially, Bitcoin is a Mercury talisman, yo. That's what it's saying. You see? They were saying, by the way, when the planet comes to its Guzahar, burn the incense and say the prayers and you'll get whatever you pray for. Wow, man, because Bitcoin was born at one of these moments, you see? So this is some potent juju. This is no joke, man. And in fact, and I'm only on my second note. I got a whole page of notes here that I want to share with you, and I'm only on my second note, and I got like 10 other notes to show you about exactly how this works out. So yeah, let me get a little bit further into this here. I'm going to pause and show you. And so in the spirit of what I said, you know, when I predicted that the Dow Jones would crash when Jupiter crossed at its south node, watch what happens when we study when Mercury goes across its north node, because what happens is this: Mercury goes across its north node, Mercury crosses the ecliptic going up. What do you think happens to Bitcoin prices? Could it be that it goes up? Yes, dramatically. The last time this happened was in July, around July 19th. Mercury crossed the ecliptic, and I had just started studying this, and the first thing I looked at is I said, all right, so you know, and so I told the guy that had asked me to look into this. I said, I think this is a time to buy Bitcoin right around July 19th. Well, let's see how good I did with that. All right, so hang on a second. And by the way, in case you're saying, oh yeah, sure, you told him that. Yeah, right. Wink, wink. I got it in writing. All right. So I'll just show you. It's in my July report. I didn't just keep it, you know, I see we have a community, right? So this guy asked me to look into it. I found something. I share it with all my members. It's in the July report. Oh, by the way, might be a good time to buy some cryptocurrency. It's in my July report. Okay, so right here it is. So Mercury is in its own bounds and its own decan, so it's dignified. It's crossing the ecliptic at its north node. By the way, this decan, Mercury in the second decan of Cancer, is associated with the Three of Cups, which is called the Lord of Abundance in the Golden Dawn system. So here it is. With the sextiles to Uranus, this may be a good time to invest in tech stock or cryptocurrency. There it is in writing. Now, let's see how I did. Well, if we just look at Bitcoin, what we see here is that the day after, I was again within 1 day. I was within 1 day with the Jupiter, with the DJIA crashing. I was within 1 day of the bottom here. And from there after 10 straight days, the longest winning streak for Bitcoin since 2013, 10 straight days closing in the green. closing higher than it opened. And that's pretty damn good. And so right there, the proof is in the pudding, yo. When Mercury crossed the Guzahar, which, by the way, that looks like this. Mercury crossed the Guzahar in tropical Cancer, but it was crossing right in the middle of the Gemini constellation here. So you can see, here's the path of Mercury. It's crossing the ecliptic. The salt of the Earth and the salt of Mercury are mixing once again, as it did in the birth chart. And that's the thing. That's the thing that I always tell people. Look, when you have, okay, remember what I told you at the beginning. Several things here, okay? Number one, when you have a planet that's on an angle in the birth chart, the transits of that planet will always be very important because the planet is angular. Number one. Number two, no transit can give you anything unless that energy is already in the natal chart. No transit is going to give you something that wasn't promised in the nativity. So on the positive side, you may see this, oh God, there's this terrible transit and it's coming to get me and it's disaster. Well, wait a minute. You don't even have that in your birth chart. You don't have to worry about it so much. Yeah, it might be terribly inconvenient for a little while, but is it going to totally change your life? And it probably not, because that's not part of your actual reason you're here. It's not in your birth chart, you see. So on the positive side, hey, you don't have to worry about so many things if you ain't got it in there. On the negative side, if you ain't got it in there, you ain't going to get it if it's a really positive one either, probably. You might get a temporary boost, but it's not like you're not going to get this pie in the sky stuff either. Okay. But in this case, Mercury's on the Guzahar in the natal. Mercury crosses the Guzahar in the transit and pew, bing, bang, boom. Now, I could stop right there and go, oh, yeah, I'm sure you're going, oh, when's the next time? We're going to get to that. It's not too far off. And there's reason to think that, not all of these crossings are created the same. Remember, I showed you that. Guess what? We're coming up on the crossing that is the most like the one when Bitcoin was born, and we're coming up on the first time that it does that crossing in the closest way to the way it did when it was born, because it comes back to Mercury comes back to the same area every 6 to 7 years. So it will do its retrogrades in Aquarius every 6 to 7 years, but it will do it in the same part of Aquarius only every 13 years. You see? So now we're in the 13th year, or we're coming up on the 13th anniversary of Bitcoin's birth. So yeah, so not only is it coming up, but it's coming up in probably the most profound way that it's ever experienced. And I'm going to share with you more about that as we go along. But I want to go so we're still on the first part of the why Mercury is so important in the Bitcoin chart, which I don't know if I reiterated this, but in case I didn't, Mercury is the god of coins. Mercury is the god of the marketplace. Mercury is the god of exchange. I mean, Norman O. Brown wrote a whole book about how Mercury, the hymn of Mercury, is a metaphor for the merchant class taking their place vis-a-vis the aristocracy, gaining some share of the marketplace of the social hierarchy from the Greek aristocracy, stealing their way into the pantheon the same way Mercury did, you see. So Mercury is like the planet of coins and exchange, but it's also the planet of upwardly mobile, socially, of the working class, merchant class becoming more upwardly mobile, which is exactly what cryptocurrency is about. It's about rewriting the rules of the game, and we're going to see why that's really important here in a second. rewriting the rules of the game so that they're not rigged to keep you down, so that they're rigged where it's even and everybody can be lifted up, even the people who aren't necessarily already well off. Because the current system, the legacy system, is pretty much rigged where if you ain't already well off, it's going to be pretty hard for you to become that way. And if you don't believe that, well, you might want to stop right here, because, and that's just abundantly obvious, at least in my lifetime, couldn't be more obvious. And I can show you a diagram that has to do with Pluto and the orbit of the Earth to do that. So let's just stop here for a second and address that. Okay, so here's another piece of research that I did with respect to the planet Pluto. This again, this graphic was done by my buddy Chris DiCarlo. I don't know if I put his name on here. I need to do that. I think it's on. I thought it was on here. But anyway, what I did is I noticed when I saw this graph, the graph that's behind, it has the blue line and the red line. I said, I've seen that curve before. It looks like the curve of a planet's latitude cycle. But what we're looking at is the amount of wealth by income level. So the top 0.1, this is not even the 1%, this is the top 0.1% versus the bottom 90%, okay? Now notice back in the Gilded Age of robber barons of the early 20th century, the top 1% had about as much wealth as the whole bottom 90%. So 90% of people owned as much altogether as the 0.1% owned. Then after the Great Depression and so forth, that began to rise. And then there was essentially a middle class was created. And the height of that middle class was in the 1970s. The disparity between the wealth of the 0.1% and the 90% was at its greatest at the same time where the planet Pluto was as far from the Earth plane as possible. Then Pluto starts to come down and starts to get closer and closer, pretty much ever since I've been alive, or at least ever since I've been aware of sociopolitics in the 1970s, old enough to know that there's elections going on and all this stuff. The gap between the top 1% and then has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until it's about the same once again. And this perfectly mirrors the curve, not perfectly, but as you can see, pretty dang close, mirrors the path of Pluto vis-a-vis the ecliptic plane. When Pluto is far away from the ecliptic plane, the wealth inequality gap is larger. When Pluto is, the wealth inequality gap is smaller. When Pluto is closer, the wealth inequality gap gets larger. So pretty much, now notice this curve has been going down steadily the whole time since the 1970s. So don't matter, there was Republicans, and you don't see a lot of, it's not going like this, up and then down and then up and then down. It's going down. So Republicans, Democrats, it don't matter, pretty much since the 1970s, been going south, whoever was in charge, okay? There was one dip in there around in the 1990s. Yeah, it's not much of a dip. As far as I'm concerned, that's pretty much the same curve the whole time. So it doesn't really matter who the central authority is or what color coat they're wearing, it's about the same difference, man. And that is that the rich have been getting richer and the poor have been getting poorer, okay? So the fact that we have in the Bitcoin chart, the fact that we have this, the fact that we have this Mercury, this planet of the upwardly mobile working and merchant class, is counter to the prevailing currents. You see, it's right there in the chart. Mercury is on the nocturnal team. Mercury is a planet that signifies the little guy being elevated. Little gal, little guy, little person, okay? And so right away, you know, that you see that this chart once again is reiterating yet another time that same theme. All right, so if that wasn't enough, another way that Mercury is involved in the structural part of this chart, notice that, remember we said Mercury is on the team with the Moon, Venus, and Mars, right? Because it's part of the nocturnal team, and Mercury is part of the nocturnal team because it's in its evening star phase. Well, notice that Venus is at 0 degrees of Pisces, Mars is at 5 degrees of Capricorn. Where's the midpoint between those two? 2.5 degrees of Aquarius. So Mercury is at the Mars-Venus midpoint, and Mars and Venus are both exalted. Now, this is a modern astrology technique. Midpoints are very powerful. They're very subtle. It's sort of like having an aspect, but it's a little more subtle than a regular aspect. So imagine that because Venus and Mars are sextile, Mercury is participating in that sextile to some degree, and sextile is a helpful aspect. So there's that. So there's several ways. So we've just been talking about the salt, the material aspect of this chart. Now, let's break down what I call the sulfur. The sulfur is the soul. It's the driving, it's the fiery driving force of the thing. So if the salt is the body, the soul is kind of like it's like the oomph, you know, it's like the will to live. It's the will or the essence of the thing. Okay. And so there's a few different ways that we look at that. So we looked at when we looked at Mercury being on the angle of the chart, that's called accidental dignity. When we look for essence, we look for essential dignity, okay? Which means that Mercury needs to be in one of its power zones within the zodiac. And when we look at that, I got to pull up another set of this. Okay. So when we look at the power zones for Mercury, what we see is that if we just look at the Bitcoin chart, Mercury's at 2 degrees Aquarius, 48 minutes, right? Okay, so let's go over here to our essential dignity wheel. Mercury rules the air triplicity, so air signs in night charts. Well, remember, we have a nocturnal chart here. Now, what that means is that triplicity dignity, triplicity means element, right? Because there's 3 signs of each element. So the triplicities are the 3 signs of any given element. There are 4 triplicities, 4 elements, 3 signs each, right? So what that means is that the nature of Mercury is similar to the nature of air, right? Communications is what air signs are about. Mercury is the god of communications. I mean, that's pretty simple. Notice that Saturn rules the air signs in a day chart. Now think about this for a second. Think about what this is telling you. In the daytime, the air element is ruled by Saturn. So in a diurnal chart, there's all these restrictions on the way you're supposed to communicate, the dominant narratives of the socio-cultural, is dominating the space, right? Because what do most people do on any given day during the daytime? They go to work. And where do they work? They work for the man, they work for some corporation, and so they, there's all these rules and strictures and, and all this, stuff that is laid over on top of that, right? Now, once you get off work in the evening, you're freer to be yourself. So Mercury, the god of movement and like I said, the little person making, right? So your side hustle would be more of what you do in the evening, you see. So Mercury ruling the nocturnal element is more fluid, more flowing, more countercultural than what an air sign would be in a day chart, you see. Okay, so Mercury has triplicity dignity. So Mercury is in a sign that agrees with its nature, right? And so that's a very positive thing. And so Mercury is able to be itself in an air sign. And generally speaking, what triplicity dignity confers is because it implies that it's part of a team. Like, in other words, there are 3 air signs, so triplicity. So it implies that you have this ability to attract people of like mind, because the air signs are all 3 ruled by, so all 3 ruled by Mercury in this chart. So even somebody who's airy but more Libra, or airy but more Gemini, they'll be like, oh, you're on my team, you're part of my tribe, what have you. And think about this for a second: the ability to attract people of like mind, the ability to attract followers, isn't that the currency of the whole influencer movement? So, that's a pretty good kind of dignity to have in this day and age, right? All right. And so now notice that Mercury is in this band. We have the bounds. Bounds dignity is like this. So Saturn is the principal of the school of Aquarius. Saturn is the ruler. Saturn says, we're going to do things carefully with long-term objectives and rigorous, all things Saturnian. Saturn is the principal. Saturn sets the overarching guidelines for the sign of Aquarius. Aquarius is a Saturnian sign, so don't get any fuzzy, hunky-dory hippie ideas about the age of Aquarius, y'all, because it's ruled by Saturn, man. But within that, you have 5 separate classrooms. So the individual classrooms might be ruled by different planets. And then the first classroom in the air signs is ruled by Mercury. So Mercury says, look, you guys, when we're in Saturn's, we have Saturn for a principal, so you got to get here to class on time, no tardiness or anything. But once you get here, we can ease up a little bit. When I was teaching high school English, I taught in the reform school. So I taught the kids that, literally, these were kids that, might assault you on any given day. I got assaulted a couple times, or threatened to be, but I actually took, was trained in ways to mitigate that. And the first kid that tried that shit on me, whoops, excuse the French there. I'm already labeling this video ain't for kids. So anyways, first kid that tried that stuff on me, I just put him in restraint and, put him in the timeout, blah, blah, blah. But I did so very effectively because I was a wrestler in high school, right? So if you show me a series of moves, I'm gonna do those. It's like it becomes muscle memory. I'm gonna do those. I'm gonna do them well, and I did. And the kids were like, all like their eyes were like this. And after that, when another one would start acting up, the rest of the kids would say to that one that was acting up, "Caden gonna ball you up, man." So, we're in Saturn school here, yo. If you mess up, I'm gonna have to ball you up. But, but if I ain't got to ball nobody up for the week, we get to Friday and y'all have been good and done your work, and I ain't had to ball nobody up. We can chill on Friday. We can play chess. I used to challenge them. I would say, okay, it's Friday. So far, y'all have been good. Tell you what, if any of y'all can beat me at Scrabble, then we'll take the rest of the day off, right? It was a sucker's bet because they didn't have a prayer of beating the English teacher at Scrabble. They tried, and they didn't even come close. But so then they were like, "Oh, come on, man, yeah, it's not fair." All right, so all right, here's a bet for you. If any of y'all can beat me at arm wrestling, then we'll take the rest of the day off. Now here's where they got kind of smart. They were like, they were like, so they lined up, all the boys lined up, and it's mostly boys because, generally speaking, those are the more worser behaved, as they would have said. So all the boys lined up, and I put them down one after the other. Boom, 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 boom. And then they saved the biggest guy. This guy was huge, man. They saved the biggest guy for last. I'm thinking to myself, I don't know, but I locked up with him, and boom, and I got the jump on him. And once you get the jump, it's hard to overcome that. And so I just wore him down, and and they were like, "I can't believe it, man. Caden beat us even at arm wrestling." Blah, blah, blah. But finally, I let him win, you know. But anyway, the point being, the rules were a little more fluid. Sometimes we would take Fridays off, or we would watch a movie or something like that, right? Because if you've got to have a reward, you got to have a carrot. I mean, there's two ways to motivate people. You got the carrot and you got the stick. The stick, again, hey, Caden Dunn showed you that he can ball you up if need be, right? So we can go that way, but I'd rather go the other way, and so I tried to work with them that way. But the point being, especially with the benefics, if you're in the sign of a malefic but you're in the bounds of a benefic, that's going to greatly modify. And Mercury is a benefic, especially in this chart, because it's part of the nocturnal sect and it's in a nocturnal. So Mercury has now here's the important lesson from that. So so every once in a while, the principal would walk by and he'd look in the room and he'd see us playing Scrabble or chess. Sometimes we would play chess, this and that. And he'd look in there and I'd just be like, "Look, man, ain't nobody bleeding. Ain't nobody, I'm not calling on the intercom, Mr. I'm not going to say his name because confidentiality, but, Mr. Principal, get down here, everything's cool, travel on, Mr. Principal." I got this, right? So that's the point, is that Mercury has the power to set the rules its own way in this particular part of Aquarius. That's really important here, because what is Bitcoin about? Bitcoin is about resetting the rules so that they're not skewed in favor of the corporations and the people with all the money, right? We already talked about that. it levels the playing field so that the little person can have some upward mobility. You see, so right here there's a lot of essential dignity. So Mercury is bang on with the salt. Mercury's bang on with the sulfur. There's another reason to think that the sulfur is really good here, and that is what we call the dispositor tree. Now, what I mean by that is, in this chart, in any chart, what you want to look at is you want to say, a planet can be in a really good position, but if its ruler, right, for instance, the principle of Aquarius is Saturn. So if Saturn is not in such a great place, if I had a poor principle, and let me tell you something, I went through that. If you after I graduated, that job was after I graduated from when I was working in the prison industrial complex. But after I graduated, I taught for a while, and then I went on and I worked at group homes and whatnot. And one time I was working at the group home, and the boss was like, "Yeah," he called me up, "How's things going?" I was like, "Well, things are going great." He's like, "What are y'all doing?" "Well, right now the boys are fishing." "Well, is that really therapeutic?" And I was like, I could have like, justified myself at that point, but I knew I would have to justify myself repeatedly to this external authority, because what was going on is I was reporting to somebody that was in another state, because the way that the whole thing was organized was just messed up. But you know how that goes, right? And so I was like, I tell you what, man, why don't you come down here and have a look for yourself? See what you think. Well, they did. And they just they pulled a little surprise visit on me, and they just happened to show up on a day where we were fishing, because boys love to fish. In general speaking, boys from the country, and we were in the country, and they pulled up. Boys were fishing, got out. I was sitting up on the hill watching the boys fish. Got out, came and sit down with me, and we talked for about 10-15 minutes. And I said, "Okay, so here you go, man. You've been here 15-20 minutes." I said, "Has anybody acted up? Have I had to make a single intervention since you've been here? Even just to say, y'all get back on task, right? Not even." So, the proof's in the pudding, man. Yes, it's therapeutic. These boys are doing everything they're supposed to be doing. Why? Because they want to be able to do this again. I've explained that to them time and time. I said, "Listen, watch." I said, "Before you're gone, I'll start doing the thing, all right, y'all. And when I start doing this, they know that I'm telling them the rules, and I'm reiterating. Oh yeah, and they'll start telling them back, so that I'll shut the heck up." So you see, this thing is set up where the principal and Mercury have a good relationship, and it's called mutual reception. Okay, Saturn rules the sign that Mercury's in, Aquarius, and Mercury rules the sign that Saturn's in. Now, and all these people that are well versed in horary and so forth are going to say, "Well, that's not a true mutual reception, because they're not making an aspect." In fact, they are what's called an aversion to one another. They're not only not making an aspect, they can't make an aspect in this. They can't make a Ptolemaic aspect in these particular signs. However, the point is this: they do share a mutuality by sign. There is no planet that has it over on Mercury in this chart, because Saturn is ruled by Mercury. Mercury is ruled by Saturn. In other words, you're right. So see, the problem that I had when I was at that group home is the person that I reported to then reported to somebody else, and so on. And it's like, and each time the person got more remote and less connected, and at some point they ended up closing down the group home because nobody wanted to deal with it because it was so far away from home base, right? And so there was this disconnect in the hierarchy. But we don't have that here. What we have is actually Saturn doesn't report to anybody that can then mess things up between this mutuality. See, this mutuality, there's nobody above either one of these cats in the hierarchy. See, those two got this mutuality going on, and everybody else is down below. There ain't nobody above either one of them to mess things up. And so it's all good. So you can say, well, it's not a true mutual reception, but guess what? It don't matter, because when you look at the dispositor tree, it's mutual enough that you avoid some problems of this chain of command getting effed up, FUBAR or so on and so forth, right? All those military acronyms that refer to such situations. So because of those two reasons, because Mercury has essential dignity and because Mercury is at the top of the dispositor tree, Mercury, if that weren't enough, another way that planets can have by being A, in their essential dignity, B, at the top of the dispositor tree, another way that can happen is if there's 3 planets that all report to each other. That's called a committee. Then once again, it's at the top of the tree. It doesn't have to worry about somebody messing things up. The other way is that it can be conjunct a fixed star. Fixed stars are fiery by nature, and they give an oomph to whatever they're touching, and that oomph is the sulfur. That is the soul essence of the chart. And in this case, Mercury is conjunct a very bright star by the name of Altair. I'm just going to stick that in here so you can see that. It's well within a degree. 154 for Altair, Mercury is at 248. So if you go by the strictest rule of 1 degree, we're good. What that looks like, I'll close this out, here we go. So you see, here's Mercury down here. Here's Altair, which is in the constellation Eagle. All right, so if you just draw a line straight down, you can see there's Mercury with the Eagle. And that's a very bright star. Notice how much bigger it is than any of the other stars around. So that gives an oomph to Mercury being conjunct a fixed star. So Mercury has several reasons for it to be powerful also on the soul level. All right, so we have Mercury is banging on the salt level, Mercury's banging on the soul level. So we have salt, we have sulfur, and we have Mercury. So we have the spirit, right? We have salt, sulfur, and spirit. So with the spirit level, spirit, the symbol for spirit is a circle. So circles in astrology are cycles. So what we're going to do now is look at where does Mercury sit within its what's known as the synodic cycle, within the cycle of Mercury vis-a-vis the sun. Right, so if we do that, what we find is that Mercury is at a point in its journey known as the maximum elongation. What that means is that if we look at again, take that sideways view, and look at Mercury is as far above the horizon and it's as far away from the sun as it gets in this particular cycle. The exact the exact elongation was the next day on January 4th at 3 degrees Aquarius. Mercury is within 1 degree of that, one day. So the next day, Mercury. Now, why is this important? Well, this is important because as it so happens, and this is part of my book, this elongation mirrors the degrees where the inferior conjunction and the other elongation are going to happen. So I'll show you a little bit more about that. And I need this. Okay, so this diagram is from my book. So what we have here is Mercury is at the first of 3 alignments that will between the above and the below. So Mercury is as far above the horizon. It's at its most visible as an evening star. And it's happening in the early degrees of Aquarius. Then Mercury is going to align with the sun below the threshold of visibility. You can't see Mercury when it's conjunct the sun. So above, below, and then the next maximum elongation as morning star. All 3 of these events happen in the same degrees. And it happens that way every single Mercury cycle. These 3 events, maximum elongation as evening star, inferior conjunction, maximum elongation as morning star, 1, 2, 3, they all happen in the same degrees. So because Mercury is at its elongation, it is in a place where it is having a 3-fold repetition of above and below. So there's this cyclical nature to the position where it's at, where this is going to be repeated 3 times. So because it's at an important turning point in its cycle, it has a heightened level of consciousness available to it. It's almost as if Mercury can see across all 3 of these. It has a way of seeing beyond where it is because it's connected to these 3, right? It has this connection to the future, essentially, is what's going on here. So what we have once again is we have on the salt level, on the simple body level of like just what it is. The thing that it is, the thing that the Bitcoin chart is very mercurial. The thing that it wants to be, the thing that it if it just expresses itself naturally and just fires out of the gate, just being itself, the sulfur is very Mercury. The thing that it becomes if it grows in consciousness, if it expresses itself, it's if on the path of growth in consciousness, that's very Mercury. On all 3 levels, this chart is extremely mercurial, you see? So now, and that is unusual. Usually when I do a natal chart, I say, okay, on the salt level, you have this planet is really accented. On the soul level, you have this planet's really accented. And on the, every once in a while, you'll see somebody have all 3. And that's unusual. And this chart has all 3 levels. Mercury is bang on off the charts. And so this chart, this Genesis Bitcoin chart is extremely mercurial. And so right away, we know that transits to Mercury are going to be very important. And in fact, when we begin to look at some other timing techniques, this is a technique called secondary progressions. It's a modern astrology technique. A lot of classical astrologers don't necessarily use it or believe in it, but it's pretty simple. What's going on with secondary progressions is this: because the cycle of the day is ruled by dark and light. We have dawn, noon, dusk, midnight, right? So you have light and dark part of the day. The cycle of the year is the same. You have spring, summer, autumn, winter, light half, dark half. They're the same cycle, just at different scales, right? And so secondary progressions is, well, if we move the chart forward 1 day for each year of life, that should tell us something. So when we move the chart forward, what we find is, see how that Mercury is at 5 degrees here? Mercury should have moved a whole lot further than from 2 to 5 in 13 days. What happened is Mercury went forward and then went and went back. Mercury's retrograde. This red means retrograde. And so Mercury is retrograde in the secondary progressed Bitcoin chart. Remember that loop? Remember how Mercury went? That's what happened. And Mercury crossed the ecliptic and then went backwards and did this loop. So Mercury is retrograde by secondary progression. And guess what? Guess what happened when Mercury went retrograde in Aquarius earlier this year? Bitcoin price did what? It went up. Because why? Because that's Mercury's northernmost Guzahar. That's the place where Mercury makes its highest loop above the ecliptic. You see? And Mercury is going to make an even closer alignment with its natal position in 2022 during the Aquarius retrograde. So I think that a lot of people are saying that, look, you know, every time that Bitcoin halving happens, the fourth quarter of the year is really big for Mercury, for Bitcoin. And so fourth quarter of 2021 is going to be huge. I think first quarter of 2022 is going to be, I think we might have two highs. We're already working on the second high of this bull run. I think there's going to be a third high. And I think that the 2022, early 2022 is going to mirror early 2021, and it's going to be even higher. Because what you have here is you have the natal chart, the progress chart, and the transit chart, all three saying the same thing. I don't know if you can hear it. I got audio slave going on in the background over there. My wife set her alarm, I guess, and forgot about it, and now it's going off in there. I'm gonna let it run. I like that song a lot. So yeah, so I think that now what's going on here is very interesting, because if you do this technique in my book and you look at the inferior conjunction of Mercury and the Sun that happened before Bitcoin's birth, that was the one in Libra. There was a retrograde in Libra before Bitcoin was born, and then there was a retrograde in Aquarius right after Bitcoin was born. Okay, so we're entering that part of the cycle again. We're in a Mercury retrograde in Libra. So now we're entering that part of the Mercury cycle where we're between Libra retrograde and Aquarius retrograde. We're in that window that Mercury, that the Bitcoin chart was born under. We're repeating. So in fact, everything about Mercury in the Bitcoin chart is being repeated. The exact path, the exact loops. The retrograde loop in Libra is going to look just like the loop when Bitcoin was born. It's going to behave exactly the same way. Notice, for instance, when I bring it back, and we do the, you'll see the superior conjunction happened at 3 degrees of Sagittarius, and the inferior conjunction happened at 13 degrees of Libra, right? So that was in 2008. Now watch this. The most recent, the next happens at 16 Libra, so that's within 3 degrees. And then the next one happens at 7 degrees of, so they're within a few degrees of the same place. And that's the first time that happened. 6 to 7 years ago, we had retrogrades in Aquarius, but they were in the farther end of Aquarius. This is the first time where the retrograde, all of the Mercury events are happening in the same degrees as when Bitcoin was born. For the first time in its existence. This is huge. This is like a major milestone. And what I talk about in my book is that this second return, it's like, if you read the biographies of a lot of different rock and roll stars, what happens is you say, oh, you know, Paul McCartney, when he was 14, what happened was, you know, he saw Elvis. And he decided, I want to be like that guy. You know, when Tom Petty was 14, he saw the Beatles and he wanted to be like them. And it just goes down the line. And Bob Dylan, I think, was Elvis also. So you see, what happens is the 14-year-old child sees this exemplar of in the mirror. They see themselves in the mirror, and who they are becomes apparent to them for the first time in their life. And I think what's happening, because Bitcoin is not a child, it's an entity, what's happening is the reverse. The collective is seeing Bitcoin as it is for the first time. They're seeing it in the mirror for the first time. People are finally starting to get it. Wow, this thing is for real. This thing has potential. This thing could be Internet 3.0, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You see? And so that's why I think this is going to be huge. I think people are right. You know, if you look at, there's a cat that what's his name? It's called Plan B, right? He does this stock to flow model, and he said, you know, right now Bitcoin should be valued at 100,000, but because of on-chain things and price things and you know, it's not, but it'll get there. And what it needs to get there is we need to close August above 47K. We did that. We need to close September above 43K. We did that. And then he said the next one will be October, I think, with 60K, and then by December 100K. So I think that's true, but I think that's just the beginning. I think when we get into the first quarter, we're going to see even higher, because we're going to see this repeat of the Mercury in the Bitcoin chart happen, and it's already started, you see, and I'll show you. So let me just stop for a second and pull up some more. Well, before I move on, I want to show you how you can see that. So in the ephemerides in my book, I map out these triple alignments. Remember how I said maximum elongation, conjunction, maximum elongation? So I did 125 years of these triple alignments. And so in 2008, we see the triple alignments were happening and between 16 and 12 of Libra, and then between 4 and 0 of Aquarius, right? Now notice this year where they're happening, between 19 and 14 of Libra and 7 and 3 of Aquarius. So not exactly the same degrees, but as close to those degrees as it's ever been. As I said, we were activating higher degrees of Aquarius in the 6 to 7 year return. And then it's only at 13 that these degrees repeat around the same. So now let me show you what that looks like coming up. We're going to have I think the first launch point for is the Guzahar during this loop, this Libra loop. So I'm going to show you the date for that. Now I saw this one guy, I can't remember who he's called, but he was hip. He was hip. He was saying, look, a lot of people, a lot of the crypto people, you know, talk down at me because I'll use anything to try to figure this out, even astrology. And he said, you know what? He said, look at the moon. He said, this stuff works, man. And he said, you know what? Mercury retrograde too. Now, he was savvy enough to know that not every Mercury retrograde behaves the same way. Now, dude, if you're listening, man, I hope somebody turns this dude on to, this is why every Mercury retrograde does not behave the same way, okay? This is, and most astrologers don't even know this, yo, so don't feel bad. I'm not talking down to you. I'm trying to lift you up, all right? I'm trying to lift everybody up by showing this stuff, because and nobody works with this. But once I discovered it, I realized this absolutely works. So check it out. This is the actual path that Mercury makes in the sky during this particular retrograde loop. What happens is it starts out close to the ecliptic. The ecliptic plane is this horizontal line here. And this is the sun, this is the constellation of the Virgin Priestess that you see, Virgo here. Here's the star Spica, which is very close to the ecliptic. It's one of 4 stars that the moon can occult, which means, pass in front of, or whoops, there you go, pass in front of. So Mercury starts out very close to the ecliptic and it actually goes down. What happened in this loop for the past month, before the last full moon, Mercury, the Bitcoin was going down. And then when Mercury turned retrograde, what did it do? It started to go up, just like Mercury did. Mercury went down, and then during the retrograde, Mercury is actually going up. And then right before it stations direct, Mercury turns and goes and takes off. Okay, so I think that this Guzahar is going to be a dramatic movement forward. There might be some, because generally speaking, the period between the new moon and the full moon is downward price movement. There might be some retracement now from, I think we're at 55, or we were the last time I looked, we're at 54, coming down from 55. I'm not going to give you a figure. Maybe it'll go back down into the high 40s or something, or low 50s. But I think when we get to this Guzahar, Mercury's going to take off probably within the area. I mean, if Plan B is right, we're going to close October around 60K. Looking at this, maybe even an all-time high before the end of October. If not before the end of October, certainly in November, I would expect that we make a new all-time high. And again, I think that's just the first part of it, because when we get to the second Guzahar in Aquarius, I think that's going to be the second all-time high, or the third all-time high of this bull run. So again, this is on October 15th, when Mercury crosses the Guzahar in Libra. And again, because Mercury was born on the Guzahar, on the North Node, anytime it crosses the Guzahar, we should see upward price movement. And so that's when I'm expecting that it will clear the previous all-time high sometime between October 15th and sometime in November, during this period when it's above the ecliptic. Okay, so that's probably way more than enough but I mean, it's just unbelievable. All of this study that I've done, all of these techniques, some of them basically I invented these techniques. I invented looking at the elongations and those triple alignments. I didn't invent the fact that they align. I'm not even going to say I discovered it. I invented the process of tracking it. Because I didn't discover, well, I guess I discovered it. I mean, it was there. So I don't know that discover is the right word, but I'm the person who created the first ephemeris to help people track it. Okay, so I invented that technique, I guess, which was what I'm saying. And like the Guzahar, like working with the Guzahars in the Picatrix. I didn't invent that technique. Grant Louis showed me that technique back in 1993 when I bought my first astrology book at a used bookstore for like $5. So it's not that I invented that technique, but these retrograde loops and understanding the different loops, basically I invented that. Nobody else is talking about that. I'm the only person out there talking about that. And so whether it's the classical astrology, the essential dignities, whether it's the modern astrology and looking at the midpoints, whether it's these synodic cycles, the stuff that and it's crazy because there's stuff that cutting edge stuff that pretty much I'm the only one that does this stuff. And no matter what technique you pull from, the stuff, the old classic stuff, the modern midpoint stuff, or the new stuff that I just invented recently, it's all in there. It's all in there, man. Everything you could want for a planet to have in the Bitcoin chart, Mercury's got it. And it just blows my mind. It's like, oh my God, this chart is mercurial to the max. And so I think that's really incredible. And I think it's very promising. And I think that what we are witnessing is a revolution in progress. And I think that blockchain technology is going to basically what they're saying about the internet 3.0 is true, but that's not it. I mean, it's like I said, if you look at our boy Charles, if you look at that video, he was talking about what I love about that video. He was talking about, the reason why Cardano is big in Africa is because everybody there, the AIDS ravaged the entire continent. And so there's not a lot of old people. There's a lot of young people, and all the young people grew up with this new technology. They grew up with these smartphones and the digital and everything. And so they're ready to go. They're like, yeah, plug us in, yo. And so A, there's that. And B, they don't have these huge corporate entities that are gatekeepers trying to hold everything down. No, we're going to regulate you. They're like, we don't want to regulate this shit. We want to set it loose, man. And so what's going to happen is you're going to have countries like Rwanda and Ethiopia are going to be leading the charge, and like El Salvador. These small countries are going to be leading the charge. And then in 10 years, and why in the world the United States of America is not working on a state bank, digital coin, central or CBDC, central bank digital coin? Yo, get with the program, yo. Like, I don't know, but they're going to regret that they didn't, because these small countries are going to get with the program and they're going to be leading the charge. And the people are going to see, oh my God, look what's going on. And they're going to want to get in on the game. And that's when that's when you're going to see what's called mass adoption begin to take hold. And who knows what could become of this? I mean, he was talking about, like, you could even use this for voting. And I was like, whoa, like, think about that for a second. Right now, we have all this talk about voter fraud and stuff. I mean, think about it. Blockchain is by definition meant to be a public ledger. Every single transaction is publicly visible. Every single transaction that happens is, you can see it. Right? So just think, if you plugged in your voting records to that, every single vote, it's right there. You don't have to wonder, you don't have to trust whether the people that are supposed to be counting this stuff, whether they followed the rules, whether they, whether they made mistakes, like with the hanging chads or whatever. You don't have to wonder about any of that stuff because it's right there. It's right there, publicly visible. Now, again, would a country like the United States be able to vote with this technology? Probably not, especially because you have these convoluted things like the like the electoral college, you'd have to program all that in after you did whatever, I don't know. But a smaller country, you could probably, certainly right now, we have what's called DAO, DAO, decentralized autonomous organization. They do their voting by block. It's designed to enable a decentralized, if you own tokens, you get to vote on what happens with that blockchain, you see? So it's designed for voting. So this could even, we don't even know the ways that this technology could be employed yet. We have no idea, you see? And so it's really exciting to me. I think he's right. I think that it is revolutionary by nature, and it's going to revolutionize everything it touches. I think that's absolutely true. It's like, and it's mercurial AF, and so it's, when I saw that, I was just like, how could I not be down with this, man? Mercury is my guy. This chart is mercurial AF. I'm in, like, let's roll, man. I'm a little late to the game, but better late than never, right? So yeah, I'm fired up, and I'm really looking forward to see what happens. And yeah, if it was me, and again, this is not financial advice, because I'm not, I'm not credited to give that kind of advice, but my own personal opinion on what, if I had any spare change laying around, and I do a little bit, not much, but I'm working class just like y'all, but what little bit I do, I'm gonna put some of it in the till and throw it in the crypto space and see what happens, man, because if nothing else, this much is true. Anybody who bought Bitcoin and held on to it for 4 years ain't never lost money. So worst case scenario, if I'm wrong and this bull cycle is already over, and you're like, Gary, yeah, man, come on, it went down, that's okay. Hang on to it, because in 4 years it's going to go up, and it's probably going to go up even higher than the last bull, because that's what every other bull did so far. So, worst case scenario is that in 4 years, you're sitting pretty. Remember, Saturn and Mercury are in mutual reception in this chart. So, again, it's not financial advice. You have to, it's a very risky thing. It's very volatile. You have to take your own risk, and you have to accept responsibility for that, for those risks. But from what it appears to me as a seasoned astrologer, there's a really good chance that even in the short term, this could be a very big deal, even yet to come, even more of a big deal yet to come. And at the very minimum, long term, I think this is the future. And so, get some and hang on to it for 4 years, and you're going to be glad you did. Basically, that's what I see. So yeah, so wow, tour de force de Hermetica Bitcoin. I think it suffices to say that, just wow. All right, so thanks for tuning in. Again, I'm at dreamastrologer.com. Be sure to sign up for my newsletter to be apprised of stuff that I got going on, and keep tuning into the podcast for my other stuff, and think about signing up for my special reports. My member, as I said, I told my members back in July, this is the time, might be good to buy some crypto, and it was. So you might want to think about signing up for those reports. It's only $15 a month, and you get, it's not, that was one of like 10 opportunities that I had. There's different magical opportunities every month. Some of them might be good for that. Some of them might be good for protection. Some of them might be good for love. Some of them might be good for, business success, etc. Right? There's all kinds of stuff in those. So you can find that on the special offers and membership page of my website at dreamastrologer.com. All right, so thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, bright blessings of Mercury at the inferior conjunction with the sun in Libra, heading towards the Guzahar. Bye for now, y'all.